What if Adolf Hitler had won the nuclear arms race? What if his V1s and V2s weren't carrying high explosive, but a deadlier cargo, a nuclear warhead? What would have happened then? Who would have won the war? It was a scenario that terrified the Allies.
Back in World War II, Nazi scientists made 664 uranium cubes as part of a secret plan to build a nuclear reactor. Then, just like that, they disappeared after the war, and no one knew where they went. Now, decades later, some of these strange cubes are starting to pop up in the most unexpected places. They're heavy, cold, and still radioactive. And yes, scientists are a little freaked out. Who's been holding on to them all this time? And why are they showing up now? What could this mean for us today? Join us as we uncover the story behind the lost Nazi uranium cubes. The uranium cubes discovery. It all began with a phone call that felt straight out of a spy movie. On a hot August day in 2013, physicist Timothy Coe, an associate research professor at the University of Maryland, was out for a jog when he got a strange and urgent call from an old friend. The friend, who still chooses to stay anonymous, told Coe to meet him in a nearby parking lot immediately. Naturally, Coe was curious. He went over to the location and found his friend waiting by a car. The friend opened the trunk, pulled out a small satchel, and inside, wrapped in paper towels like someone was trying to keep it safe, was a mysterious dark metal cube. It was small, only about 2 inches on each side, but incredibly heavy. It looked old, with a charcoal black color and notches around its edges. Along with it was a strange note, almost like a ransom message. It said, "Taken from Germany from the nuclear reactor Hitler tried to build. Gift of Ninninger." That one sentence changed everything, but what exactly are these cubes? Keep watching to find out. Coe, who happens to collect nuclear memorabilia, yes, that's a real hobby, instantly knew that this wasn't just any old metal cube. He believed it could be one of the uranium cubes made by Nazi Germany during World War II for their secret nuclear project. Back in 1945, the Nazis were trying to build a nuclear fission reactor. In a place called Haigerloch, German scientists, including the famous Werner Heisenberg, used 664 uranium cubes in an experiment to try to get a chain reaction going. These cubes were strung together in a chandelier-like shape and dunked in heavy water. They never got the reaction to work, but the setup was eerily close to something that could have changed history. So how did this cube end up in the trunk of a car in Maryland? Coe couldn't stop thinking about it. He dug into the note's reference to Neininger and found out that it probably referred to Robert D. Neininger, a metallurgist who had worked on the Manhattan Project, the secret U.S. program that actually succeeded in building atomic bombs. It turns out, Neininger once owned a Nazi uranium cube, and he gave it to a friend. That friend might be the one who passed it along, leading to the strange parking lot exchange. Coe teamed up with Miriam Hebert, a PhD student at the University of Maryland, to dig deeper. They ran tests to confirm the cube's authenticity and trace it back to Nazi Germany. And yes, it was real. But here's the part that got scientists worried. If this one cube turned up unexpectedly, where are the rest? Out of 664, only a handful have ever been officially accounted for. That leaves hundreds still missing. This begs the numerous questions that we all have. Who has them? Where are they? And what could someone do with them? This unexpected discovery of a relic from the past left us with a renewed interest on Nazi nuclear program, and also the mystery behind the origins of these uranium cubes. Another question that boggles our mind is how the pre-World War II world was able to discover nuclear powers. Let's find out how. Nuclear weapons discovery. In December 1938, something happened in a lab in Berlin that would quietly change the world forever, though hardly anyone realized it at the time. 2 German chemists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, were doing experiments by firing neutrons at uranium atoms. They expected the uranium to transform into heavier elements, which was the normal result. But instead, something strange happened. The uranium split apart into much lighter elements, including one called barium. This was not supposed to happen, and the scientists were genuinely confused. Not sure what to make of it, Hahn wrote a letter to his longtime friend and scientific partner, Lisa Meitner. She was an Austrian physicist who had fled Germany because she was Jewish and had settled in Sweden. Over the Christmas holidays, Meitner sat down with her nephew, Otto Frisch, also a physicist, and together they dug into the strange results. What they figured out was groundbreaking. The uranium nucleus had undergone fission, meaning it had split into two smaller parts, and in doing so, released a huge amount of energy. Meitner and Frisch were the first to understand and explain what had happened. In early 1939, they published a paper explaining the physics behind this reaction. It was the birth of nuclear fission, and soon everyone in the scientific world knew about it. The reason this discovery was so earth-shattering? Well, thanks to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, they realized that even a tiny loss of mass during fission could be turned into a massive amount of energy. If you could create a chain reaction where one fission causes another, and so on, you could, in theory, build a bomb more powerful than anything the world had ever seen. Word spread quickly. One of the scientists who recognized how serious this was happened to be Niels Bohr, a Nobel Prize-winning Danish physicist. He brought the news to the United States in early 1939, just as war in Europe was becoming more and more likely. Soon, scientists in America started repeating the experiments and confirming that uranium-235, a rare form of uranium, could sustain a chain reaction if refined correctly. They also began exploring other elements like plutonium-239 and uranium-233, which could also be used as fuel for powerful reactions. The timing of this discovery was absolutely chilling. Hitler had just taken over Austria, and Nazi Germany was getting more aggressive by the day. Many of the brightest minds in physics, many of them Jewish, had already fled Germany, but now there was real fear that the Nazis might try to use nuclear fission to build an atomic bomb. And what if they got there first? This fear sparked serious, behind-the-scenes conversations among scientists in the UK and the US. Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, who had long worried about the military use of nuclear energy, began writing warning letters to governments. By August 1939, he teamed up with none other than Albert Einstein to write a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. They warned him that Germany might already be working on nuclear weapons. Roosevelt took the warning seriously. He created the Advisory Committee on Uranium, a small team that would eventually grow into the Manhattan Project, the top-secret program that led to the creation of the first atomic bombs. And just like that, science had stepped into a new, terrifying chapter, one where ideas from a quiet lab in Berlin could shape the fate of the world. Apart from the nuclear weapons being created, there was something more dangerous that was being crafted, and it was these uranium cubes. But what exactly led to their creation? Let's find out. The creation of the uranium cubes. While most of the world was focused on tanks, planes, and troops during World War II, something much quieter but potentially more dangerous was brewing behind closed doors. In the early 1940s, as Europe fell deeper into war, nuclear science was shifting from lab experiments to something with real, world-changing power. Scientists had just discovered nuclear fission, and it was quickly becoming clear that this wasn't just a fascinating new area of physics. It was the key to a weapon more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. Meanwhile, in Britain, they launched their own secret project called Tube Alloys to explore this strange new science. But progress was slow. War eats up a lot of resources, and trying to build something as complicated as a nuclear bomb or reactor during air raids wasn't exactly easy. Still, the British were determined not to fall behind. Meanwhile, in Germany, things were moving in a much more mysterious and secretive direction. At the prestigious Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, German scientists, under the leadership of Werner Heisenberg and Kurt Diebner, started digging into the possibilities of nuclear chain reactions. At first, their goal wasn't a bomb, but something just as important, a nuclear reactor. You see, while the Allies would go on to focus their energy on actually building an atomic bomb, the Germans had a slightly different plan at first. Their idea was to build a functioning reactor that could create plutonium, another type of fuel that could eventually be used to make a bomb. But even that required solving some big scientific puzzles, starting with how to trigger and control a chain reaction. To pull it off, they needed two key ingredients: uranium and heavy water. Uranium would act as the fuel, and heavy water, basically water that contains an extra heavy form of hydrogen called deuterium, would slow down neutrons just enough to make fission more likely in natural uranium. Natural uranium, after all, contains only a tiny amount, about 0.7%, of the really explosive stuff, uranium-235. This is where the famous uranium cubes come into play. German scientists created hundreds of solid uranium cubes, each about 2 inches across and weighing around 5 pounds. They were shaped with precision and meant to be suspended in heavy water inside an experimental reactor. These weren't weapons themselves, but they were the building blocks of a system that could, in theory, produce the ingredients for a nuclear bomb. This group of scientists became known as the Uranverein, or Uranium Club. It was Nazi Germany's secret nuclear program, hidden away from the chaos and violence happening across Europe. Led by Heisenberg, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist best known for the uncertainty principle, the Uranium Club had a lot of brainpower but also plenty of roadblocks. They lacked the massive industrial power and resources the Allies had, and they struggled to get enough heavy water and uranium to make their experiments work. Still, the fact that Nazi Germany was even trying to harness nuclear energy is chilling. Their reactor may not have worked as planned, but the effort itself was dangerously ambitious. Out of the 664 uranium cubes made by Nazi Germany, about 400 were used in their most serious nuclear experiment in Haigerloch, a quiet town in southern Germany. Heisenberg and his team set up their last big reactor project in the basement of a church beneath a medieval castle. They hung the cubes in a ball shape and dunked them in heavy water, hoping to start a chain reaction. But it didn't work. Thanks to sabotage in Norway and the Allies getting closer to ending the war, they just didn't have enough heavy water or time to make it happen. What happened next? Stay tuned to find out. How the uranium cubes were dispersed. Each of those 664 uranium cubes made by the Nazis during World War II wasn't just a chunk of metal. It represented countless hours of work, money, and ambition. These cubes were part of a desperate gamble by Hitler's scientists, an effort to tip the balance of the war by building a working nuclear reactor that could eventually lead to an atomic bomb. This wasn't just science. It was a race against time, and the stakes were terrifying. These cubes weren't just technical parts, they were symbols of how far Nazi Germany was willing to go to win the war. And as it turns out, they weren't so far from getting there. But thanks to sabotage, setbacks, and Allied pressure, their nuclear dreams never took off. That's where Operation Alsos comes in. As the Allies pushed deeper into Nazi territory, they weren't just chasing soldiers, they were chasing secrets. Operation Alsos, Greek for Grove, as a nod to General Leslie Groves of the Manhattan Project, was a top-secret Allied mission designed to uncover and capture anything related to the Nazi nuclear program. It wasn't just military folks on this team. Scientists, spies, and engineers made up the core, and they were on a mission. Find the German scientists, seize their research, and most importantly, make sure Hitler didn't get the bomb. The operation was a wild ride through war-torn Germany. The team followed the trail of the retreating German army, often walking into labs that had been hastily abandoned, papers still fluttering on the desks. In some places, Nazi scientists had buried or hidden parts of their reactors to keep them from falling into Allied hands. In one town, Haigerloch, they found a hidden nuclear lab beneath a church, with reactor components stuffed into a secret shaft. Luckily, none of the Nazi reactors ever went critical, meaning they never managed to achieve a self-sustaining chain reaction. Germany, for all its scientific talent, never built a working atomic bomb. But that didn't stop the fear from spreading among Allied leaders. They genuinely believed the Nazis might be just months ahead in the nuclear arms race. That fear partly fueled the push behind the Manhattan Project in the US, led effort that eventually dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, what happened to the uranium cubes after the war ended? That's where the story gets weird. The Allies got their hands on the cubes during Operation Alsos. They packed them up, shipped them to the US, and somehow started losing track of them. Seriously. A few ended up in labs, some became souvenirs, and others simply vanished. Then, decades later, they're mysteriously reappearing one by one. One showed up in a parking lot in Maryland in 2013. That single cube wrapped in paper towels landed in the hands of physicist Timothy Coe. The note with it said it came from Hitler's failed nuclear program. This mysterious find reignited an old puzzle. Where are the rest of the cubes? And if these were once meant to fuel a Nazi reactor, what's being done with them now? That's the troubling part. These weren't toys or simple artifacts. These cubes were meant to unlock the most destructive force known to man for one of history's most dangerous regimes. And now they're quietly popping up in storage rooms, labs, and yes, parking lots. So where exactly did the rest of the 664 cubes go? And how worried should we be? Keep watching because what comes next will shock you, where the rest of the remaining uranium cubes are. Believe it or not, out of the original 664 uranium cubes created by Nazi Germany during World War II, fewer than 20 are known to still exist today in public or scientific hands. The rest? Well, they're missing. That's hundreds of chunks of radioactive material, each made for one of history's darkest scientific projects, gone without a trace. So where are they now? That's exactly the kind of question that keeps scientists like Timothy Coe up at night. Coe, a physicist and historian of science, was gifted one of the uranium cubes in 2013. It arrived with no fanfare, just a mysterious little package containing a cold, dense, slightly glowing block. And just like that, Coe was drawn into one of World War II's strangest and most unsettling scientific mysteries. He didn't go on this journey alone. Coe teamed up with Miriam Hebert, a materials scientist who also had a deep interest in the strange crossroads between history and nuclear science. Together, they launched a search that would stretch across the globe, a mission to find, study, and track down the Nazi cubes. First, they had to be sure Coe's cube was even real. It looked right. It felt right. It even gave off the correct level of radiation. But they needed proof. Using advanced techniques like gamma spectroscopy and radioisotope analysis, they examined the cube's nuclear fingerprint, a chemical signature that shows how and when the uranium was processed. The results were pretty clear. This cube almost certainly came from Nazi Germany, most likely made between 1943 and 1944, and it could have even been part of Heisenberg's final failed nuclear reactor project in Haigerloch. With this confirmation, Coe and Hebert's mission got serious. They reached out to labs, museums, universities, even private collectors, anyone who might have a cube or a lead on one. And what they found was wild. Some real cubes turned up in U.S. national labs like Los Alamos and Oak Ridge. A few were sitting quietly in university archives. One even popped up at a German science museum. But for every real cube they found, there were also fakes, replicas made for teaching, or worse, shady sales. Before long, Coe and Hebert became the go-to experts for anyone claiming to have one of these cubes. They tested samples, confirmed the real ones, and built a growing database of verified specimens. Each cube they discovered, had its own bizarre journey. Some were brought to America right after the war, others changed hands through scientists or collectors. A few, alarmingly, had no clear history at all. And that's where things get serious. These aren't just souvenirs from a dark chapter of science, they're radioactive material. And right now, no one knows where the majority of them are. Hundreds of cubes are still missing. And even though they can't be used to make a bomb on their own, they can be dangerous in the wrong hands, or even just if they're sitting unprotected in someone's basement. Kauth and Hebert's work has caught the attention of historians, journalists, and even nuclear safety officials. Because this is no longer just a cool science story or a World War II mystery. It's a real-world security issue. If even a few of these missing cubes are still out there, undocumented and uncontained, then the past could easily sneak back into the present. So yes, the hunt for the Nazi cubes might feel like a strange adventure. But at its core, it's about preventing history's darkest science from turning into tomorrow's problem. And that's something worth keeping an eye on. What are your thoughts on these uranium cubes created by the Nazis? Let us know your opinions in the comment section below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Click on the next video displayed on your screen, you will enjoy it.